Hey guys, Chad from Civil Pour here. Today we're going to talk about the Chemex. Now this is one of the classic brewing styles. This thing has been around since the early 40s, before World War II actually. It's a classic design, and we're going to talk about this as part of our pour over series. So pour over coffee is basically brewing coffee by the cup. In this case, the Chemex is actually the largest of the pour over styles. So if you want to make a few cups with this, you certainly can. Now, some of the advantages with pour over coffee, we can control the temperature of the water. Obviously, with every type of brew method, we control the grind size, and we can control how the brew actually occurs in the brewing vessel, in this case, the Chemex. Let's talk a little bit about the Chemex itself, what makes it a little bit different than some of the other brew methods out there. This right here is a Chemex filter paper. Doesn't matter if you have the circular or if you have the square version of this paper. You'll see this is the paper here. It's one of the thickest and probably the thickest of all the filters out there, which has a couple of good things and bad things. So one of the good things is the fact that it's the thickest paper. It's removing all the really fine sediment that you might find in coffee, which is just something that happens naturally. So you're going to get the cleanest tasting cup of coffee out there. Maybe some of the bad things there is that you have more chance to get a paper taste in your coffee. And you also have a little bit of chance to reduce some of that bitterness that people like in coffee, because those fine sediment pieces, some people like that in there. For example, people like French press probably really wouldn't like a Chemex because it's really the exact opposite end of the brewing spectrum. Now, there are several different versions of this particular vessel. One does not have, this is the original version right here. So wooden collar, it's the classic style. This is the one that's in the Modern Museum of Art, and this helps you from having that get too hot. You can grab it with your hand. There's another version that has a handle that kind of attaches, it's a glass handle, to the side. And that version, some people like it a little bit better because it's easier to clean, because this thing is kind of difficult to remove and take off. And I actually just leave it on there, and I focus on cleaning the inside, and I try to keep the outside from getting dirty. But there are several versions of this in terms of size. There's a 1, a 3, a 6, an 8, and a 10 cup version. Now, if you're going to brew a smaller version, I really just recommend getting a V60 or a different brewing method, not the Chemex. I would go with the 6, 8, or the 10. The smaller ones tend to have this sort of more narrow brewing cone, which really makes it difficult to get the water to draw down through the coffee bed. So I just don't really recommend those smaller versions of the Chemex. Stick with the classics, the 6, 8, or 10 cup versions, and we'll go from there. So let's talk about some of the tools you're going to need with this brew. Obviously, you're going to need your kitchen scale. Definitely needs to be able to measure in grams. You need some fresh whole bean coffee that has not been ground yet. Your grinder. If you do not have a grinder yet, make sure when you buy one, you're going to get a burr grinder. Now, you can get something as inexpensive as a hand grinder if you're willing to do a little bit more work, or I really recommend an electric grinder because you're going to get tired of cranking that electric or the hand grinder. The electric makes things a lot easier. My recommended brand is Baratza. Baratza is the one that has been known for making the best home grinders on the market. The Encore is the entry-level version of this grinder. This is one step up from that, the Virtuoso. Encore, I want to say, starts at about $139. The Virtuoso is right around $229. So depending on what your budget is, you're really probably never going to replace this thing. This thing's going to last forever. Not a lot of parts in here that can fail. Not going to say it's impossible, but I've had this thing for 5, 6, 7 years probably, and it hasn't failed me in any way yet. Just make sure to keep it clean. It should last you a long time. All right, let's talk about this filter paper. The first thing you're going to notice is that there are 4 layers to this paper right here, okay? The first 3 layers are going to be sitting at the front of your brewer. And when I say the front of the brewer, I mean on that pour spout there, you want those 3 layers to sit on the front side. And the reason you want that is because this can tend to create an air gap if the paper falls and up against that spout. You don't want a vacuum to form on the inside where you've got this issue where the water can't draw down. So make sure you've got those 3 layers of paper on the front side. So the first thing we're going to do, I just pulled this off the boil, so this started at 212. Depending on your coffee, you're going to be in that 195 to 205 range. At the higher end of that is for your lighter roasted coffees. At the lower end of that 195 to 205 range, that's for your darker roasted coffees. So let's make sure we get that filter plenty wet. This is going to rinse off any paper taste. I also never recommend the unbleached paper version of this, and the reason for that is because you just can't get rid of the paper taste. It's just not possible. So I know a lot of people like to avoid the term bleach, but in this case it's really imperative for your coffee brewing. We're also heating the vessel here, making sure it stays nice and warm. Since I'm not quite ready to brew yet, let's let that stay warm. Now, in my other video we talked about calculating how much coffee you need for your brews. So in this case, I know that I want 500 grams of coffee, or 500 milliliters. So in that case, one way I can calculate that ratio is I can divide the number of milliliters of water in the 15 to 17 range. So 500 divided by 15, 500 divided by 17, somewhere in that range. Today we're going to go with 30 grams of ground coffee. So zero out my scale. So I've got 30 grams of fresh ground coffee. This is Novel's Misty Valley Ethiopian, a natural processed coffee. So we're going to put that in our grinder, and we're going to grind just slightly coarser than for an automatic drip maker. So on the Virtuoso, that's a 20 is kind of the standard setting, because for a drip maker I'm in the 18 range. So we're going to go slightly coarser. You've got to get this water out of here because we used it to keep it warm, so I'm just going to pour the water out through this spout while kind of keeping this filter out of the way. Alright, so we've got our fresh rinsed hopper, or fresh rinsed Chemex. We've got our beans out of the hopper. I'm going to put those in, and I'm going to level it out so that the coffee is level in the bed. But I'm going to kind of dig a little bit of a well, because what I want to do is I want to make sure I get all these grounds wet as fast as possible when I start what we call the bloom phase. Now, we know we're brewing 500 milliliters of water today. The other way you can calculate that, if you know you want 20 ounces of coffee, take that 20, multiply it by 1.6 to 2.0, somewhere in that range. That gives you your grams of coffee. In this case, we want to try to get this all the coffee wet, and I want to make sure I cover all the coffee, and when I do that I'm going to swirl this so that I can get all that CO2 out of the coffee as quickly as possible. Now what I did is I took my finger, I kind of dug it around in there, and I left this sort of cone shape of coffee on that filter. And now I'm going to let it breathe for a full 45 seconds. At this point, we know we're brewing 500 milliliters of coffee. We want to have 60% of that total water in as soon as our 45 seconds are up. So that's going to take me to a full 300 milliliters. I'm at 79, that's what it took me to get all my coffee wet. So let's pour this to 300. We're going to start in the center, and I'm going to make concentric circles moving outward. My goal here is to get all the coffee wet and pour starting from the center outward. So now we've got this coffee. We've got 300 mils of water in. You can see the water starting to draw down now. And we want to make sure that we keep this spout free of the paper. So if you notice anytime during the brewing process that the paper is sticking, just pull it out and resituate it. It's not going to hurt anything. But you want to make sure you've got plenty of air in that spout as the coffee is brewing. And we want to continue to keep the amount of this thermal mass here, we want to keep that hot throughout the brewing process. So I'm really going to start pouring again right away. And the idea here is not really to disturb the bed of coffee, so I'm going to pour along the edges now. And I'm going to pour up to the full 500 milliliters. Now the last thing you're going to do when you're waiting, because at this point we're just waiting for the water to draw down, we're going to grab a spoon. Okay, now we're going to just stir around the outside, and this is just to free any fine coffee particles that are around the outside and make sure that they flow down into our bed of coffee. And when we finish all of this, if we did our jobs correctly, we're going to have a flat bed of coffee at the end of it. And guys, as you start to get a little bit nerdier with your brews, you're going to start timing them. You're going to start trying to figure out how long did it take for my water to draw down. The best way to experiment with how your coffee tastes, once you've got your temperature kind of dialed in, because like I said, you want to be in that higher range for the lighter roasted coffees, in the middle range for your medium roast, and then maybe at that very low end of the range for something that's really dark roast. If you're in a specialty cafe, you're probably not going to find a lot of coffee that is dark roasted. If you're getting stuff from a larger producer like Peach or Starbucks or something like that, almost all of those coffees are going to be dark roasted regardless of what the package says. When you get coffee from multiple farms and you're a large supplier like Starbucks, you start having it sourced from multiple farms, you really have to roast the origin character. And when I say origin character, I mean what the beans taste like with relation to the soil that it was grown in, because every individual farm is going to have its own origin character. Companies like Starbucks, Pete's, they have to roast their coffee a little higher because they've got brands like Pike Place Roast, and that coffee has to be roasted to a higher level in order for it to taste like Pike Place. So we can't really keep it at a lower roast level. So those larger guys are always going to have something in the dark roast. So keep it in the 195 range. Let me show you guys kind of what has finished here. So I've got a fairly flat coffee bed here at the end, which is exactly what we want to see. Shouldn't have a lot of fine particles around the outside. You're always going to have some because there are just going to be tiny particles in there. And at that point, the idea is just to grab it and discard it and enjoy the coffee. All right, so kind of circling back to what I was talking about, when you're ready to pour this, just give it a nice little swirl. If there's any fines that have settled to the bottom, we want to make sure those are incorporated in every cup. But as far as experimentation with grind size, if you have a cup of coffee and you're not happy with how it tastes, if you're on that sort of acidic side or things are tasting like they're a little weak, or if your coffee is more like tea, go to a little bit of a finer setting. On the other side of that, if you go too far, always make small adjustments too. If you go too far and you go too fine, you're going to end up with coffee that's probably too bitter. It's maybe got some flavors that you don't want in that cup, and it's just not enjoyable to drink. Coffee should really be balanced. It should make you want to drink more of it, and it should be thirst quenching. I think that pretty much wraps up today's episode with the Chemex. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below. We'll make sure to respond to those in a timely manner. But for now, I'm going to enjoy this coffee. Cheers.